today we are going to talk about Unit 9, called the classical culture. So the classical culture makes reference to the Greek and Roman culture that still have a strong presence in the Western culture nowadays. But what does the word classic mean? It comes from the Latin classicus, which meant that it belonged to the highest class, to things that were considered superior. And we use it to make reference to things that don't go out of fashion, such as in classical music or classical fashion, or that joke is a classic. It's like some kind of joke that maybe grandparents and parents and sons enjoy. So we are going to try to understand the importance of the legacy that the Greek and Roman culture left us, which is immense. Because we can say that it was in ancient Greece when science for the first time appeared. It's when the curiosity to understand the nature, the world, the use of reason, to go beyond religion and myths started to really take shape. And later, with the Roman culture, it was going to consolidate this, because the Roman culture was going to be very practical and was going to develop more the sense of the common good. So in this unit we are going to talk about some of the major achievements of, for example, of the Greek culture in terms of philosophy, ways of thinking, theories that we still apply today and we still study today because they are very relevant to our way of thinking, or how the different areas of science appear, or how the canons of art were established. Canons of art that are still nowadays extremely important in our culture. And if we go around, we still see buildings that are built using these ideas that were established over 2,500 years ago. So let's start. So first, let's talk about philosophy. We can say that the Greeks were the inventors of philosophy. So for the first time in history, these people, mainly men, but also some women, started to try to question the religion and mythology as the only way to understand why are we here in this world. Who are we as humans? So they started to create the foundations of like distancing from believing that everything had been created because of God's will or God's desire. So philosophers such as Socrates or Plato, in Spanish Platón, or Aristotle, in Spanish Aristóteles, and developed a system based on dialogue, on going through questions and answers and just trying to find the truth. And they were going to set the foundations of all the Western philosophy that has had transcendence until our days, and we still our days study these philosophers and their principles as important to question ourselves. Who are we? What are we doing in this world? Etc. etc. So in science, we can also say that Greeks laid the foundations of Western science. It was them that for the first time started to observe nature and try to give a reasonable explanation to what happened, instead of saying that it had been the gods who had done this or that. So we attribute them the scientific method of observation of nature and then experimentation. So it was going to be Greek Aristarchus who discovered for the first time and elaborated the theory that the earth revolted around the sun and not the other way around. This theory was going to be long forgotten and for almost 2000 years, and it was going to be in Europe in the 17th century when his theories were going to be recovered and tested, and he was going to be proved right. Also, the Greeks set the foundations of mathematics with men as Thales of Miletus, Euclid, and Pythagoras, who established the basis of geometry that we still study nowadays. Probably you have studied them recently. And then in the area of physics, it was going to be Archimedes, the one who was going to make the first experiments and establish the first laws. It is also well known that Western literature owes a lot to Greek and Latin literature. Our European languages are based on Latin, and for hundreds and hundreds of years, their main Greek and Roman authors have been a great influence for writers. So the poetry was based, for example, Greek culture had a long tradition of oral poetry with these long poems that people learn by heart about the adventures of heroes. The most famous are the Iliad and the Odyssey, written by Homero in Espanol. But there were many important poets. Greeks loved poetry, and we also have a very famous women poet that was called Sappho. But probably the genre that Greeks and Romans liked the most was theater. Theater, it was more than an entertainment for them. It was also part of the celebration and offerings that they did on the festivals for their gods. But it was a great moment for them to gather and learn something and offer it to their gods. So it was an activity that was very popular, which explains that archaeologists have found many Greek theaters in Greek cities. Greeks built their theaters using the slope of the mountains, and they were great builders, the architects that used nature just to better to use the sound in the best way. Yeah, so they could have in one theater thousands of people that they could hear the human voice without needing any, obviously they didn't have any microphone, so it was a way to amplify their voices just by the slope of the mountain. The slope is la ladera de la montaña. So for them it was more than an entertainment, it was a way to educate. They had Greeks had two types of theater: tragedy and comedy, and then we were going to have a middle gender that was called tragicomedy. So the most popular writers of tragedies were Sophocles or Euripides, and they mixed the stories, mythological stories, with human stories, just trying to teach things with that. Teach things about the human nature, about feelings, about love and betrayal, and the important things of life. The Romans were, as we have said before, more practical, so they enjoy more comedy with writers such as Plautus. But these comedies also were educational in the sense that they were very ironic, and they criticized the Roman society, so that it was a way, just to observe and learn about the good and bad things of their culture. But literature goes beyond that, and actually we can say that the fathers of history and geography, so my subject, appeared in this period. Yes, so the first historian, Herodotus, started to write in this period, and he started to collect sources that went beyond myths to try to explain history by asking people about what had happened at the beginning, just like about recent events, about the Persian War, and later other historians will just try to recollect older information. And then in the case of Strabo, in Spanish Estrabón, he is the first geographer that also, not only he traveled, but he also collected information of other sailors and people that had traveled across the Mediterranean, and he put it together in a series of books that are extremely useful for us now, because his curiosity about geography in a wide sense, so not just about like the physical geography, about the coast, the mountains, the rivers, but also about the people that live there, it's an invaluable source for information for historians now. And just to finish this video, let's think about the transcendence of Greek culture. It goes beyond what they invented or discovered. They created a language that was perfect for science, and we still use it nowadays. So if you think about, many scientific terms are composed by Greek words. So, for example, the word astronomy comes from the word astro, that means star, and the word nomos, that means law. So astronomy means the laws or the study of the stars. Or anthropomorphic, that anthropos means man, and morphos means shape. So anthropomorphos means that has the shape of person, of a man. So there are lots of words like this in the English language and in the Spanish too. So can you think on any?